So now that's when we're gonna start talking about vicarious trauma, and that goes together with what Anna was saying about how although it's a wonderful job, beautiful profession, it's also considered a very stressful one, and that's a term that started late 90s, like 80s, and vicarious trauma became, it's known as a term that described the cost of caring. So I think that's the definition that I like the most about vicarious trauma, because that's basically what it is. It's just we care for our students daily, and that has a cost. Like if we don't take care of ourselves, then that whole stress kind of builds up. And vicarious trauma, just so you know, if you're reading other things about that topic, you can also hear as secondary traumatic stress and victimization. So that's just so you be aware. So vicarious trauma is the emotional residue. So you talk with students daily. You experience their excitement with things that they're doing. So many times students are going on vacation and they share with you like how fun and excited they are about going out, and you just kind of get excited for them too. But other times kids, they also share with you bad things. So they share how sad they are that their parents are getting divorced, or how they just lost a parent or a loved one, and all of that kind of carries and adds it up. So that's what this is all about. So it's just every time when we listen to a student that shares with us a traumatic event, and then we take that pain for ourselves, and we kind of carry. So we carry that pain that the student is feeling. And that's not a bad thing. That's about being human, right? We listen to a sad story, we can cry with the person, or we cry watching a movie, and it's not even real. So it's completely natural. What's not good is when we carry that pain with us and that start impacting us. So when we don't know how to work or how to deal with that stress, and we start thinking and kind of putting ourselves in, and like if we are experience that same pain that the students experience, and that student is maybe living one difficult moment in time in their lives, but then you add that to several students throughout several years, and all that pain start adding it up. So if you really don't know how to work with that, it can really become a problem. So this whole tension and stress related to what students, like negative comments that students, or negative, not negative stories, but just traumatic events that students share with us, can cause what's vicarious trauma. And a few ways for us, or some ways that teacher experience vicarious trauma, is by avoid talking or thinking about what the trauma is, or even like trying to avoid the student. So you know that that student's suffering, you know that that student's going through something that's very difficult, and you just find as many ways as possibly to just avoid that student or avoid that problem, because you just, like, your cup is full, you just cannot handle one more thing. And sometimes we do it without even knowing that we are trying to avoid that. And also being in a constant arousal state where we are always like stressed, we just feel nervous, we just feel tense, even on weekends, or when it's time to relax, we just cannot relax. We're just kind of just too stressed or sad, and sometimes we cannot even explain why, or we don't even quite understand or connect that what we are feeling is because of all the things that we are carrying from our work, or from our daily experience. So teachers definitely should be aware of signs and symptoms of vicarious trauma, and it's important to learn more so you can identify. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the signs and symptoms, so that way, I'm sorry, the list is long. I hate to put so much information on one slide, but I just didn't want to miss out anything. But you can go over the list. You're going to have access to the slides, but it can be a lot of signs that are kind of similar to depression, similar to other a little bit more well-known problems, but overall it's just like having a hard time sleeping or staying asleep, also overeating, undereating, just more than normal, and just not knowing why, and also feeling trapped by their work as a teacher. So when you go to work and you just don't feel joy anymore, and you just don't feel satisfaction, and it's the beginning of the new year, instead of being excited about getting to know your new students, you're just feeling like, oh my gosh, like what's coming next, or I hope I don't have kids with too many problems, and start blaming others or other things for your own unsatisfaction with work. And you just feel hopeless, like you just feel like I cannot do anything, like there is nothing I can do to help this kid, there is nothing I can do to resolve this problem. So it's just like you just feel worthless, and you also feel at the same time that you are not doing enough for your students. So it's really a internal battle that brings like a lot of confusion, a lot of negative feelings that you can kind of carry with you day in, day out, and that brings a lot of struggles to your daily life, not only at work but also at home. So some effects of vicarious trauma can be frequent job change. So you have a classroom, or you're working at a school, and you start having a lot of problems, or you just don't find a way to work with the problems that you have. Then you think, okay, maybe it's the school, right? Like you start blaming others, and you're like, maybe if I change to a different location, maybe everything will be better. And then you start changing, or going from school to school, and nothing changed, because it's not the school, it's just how, and it's not you either, it's just that you don't know that what's going on with you internally, and you don't know how to deal with that. So also missing work a lot, overworking, so you feel like you're not doing enough, so you work even more, and then you crash. So it's kind of like a lot of ups and downs, but in general, like low motivation, like increased errors at work, and lack of flexibility, like you just don't feel like you can do much or change much. So those are signs or effects of vicarious trauma that affects your daily life. Another topic that goes well together with vicarious trauma that we want to share with you is about compassion fatigue. And compassion fatigue is exactly what it sounds as well. So it talks about when we are just tired. So I don't know if you guys ever experienced, like you come and a kid comes and tells you a story about how their dog died, and you cry with that kid and you're so sad. And then by the fifth kid that comes and tells you the same story, I'm like, okay, yeah, it's just a dog. So it's kind of that feeling where you just don't have that same level of compassion. You just don't feel that whatever the kid's sharing with you is that important, because you hear that story so many times throughout your years that you just kind of lose that sensibility about demonstrating compassion to your kids. And it's also a stress that result from helping and wanting to help a person that's going through that trauma. So when you do that so much, then you get compassion fatigue. So it's also a manifestation that that kind of trying to explain in a clear way, but the research says is that the existence and manifestation are reflected in the implementation of a good relational engagement, and adequate use of empathic capacity. So we're going to talk a little bit more about it. And sometimes those topics can get a little bit not as clear, but I want to make it as clear as possible. So some signs of compassion fatigue. And as you listen to that, just think about if anything kind of matches with what you feel, or if you ever felt that way. And then just as a personal evaluation. So intrusive thoughts, difficult sleeping, so it kind of goes well together with the traumatic vicarious trauma. Just being irritable, often headaches, anger, just feel like you cannot have any hope or help towards your students, just what I was saying before, just the reduced empathy towards what they are going through. And then can you imagine, like if you were going through something very difficult and you go to share with someone that means a lot to you, right? Like a friend or a family member, and then they just don't seem to care enough, or they just don't seem to get it, that what you're going through is very difficult, like you just feel worse. So it's the same thing when a kid goes and share with you something that's important to them, and we act like if it's nothing, it really breaks their heart, and it can be hard on them. So it's important to be aware of that, and to kind of see what you can do to help you, so that way that you don't have that. And also impaired decision making, like you just don't know, or you just don't have a clear mind about how to decide on things, or how to decide about how to react to that problem that the student's sharing with you. So some effects of the compassion fatigue. So it reduces the ability to connect with and feel empathy for others. So that's what I mentioned before, and that's basically one thing that we want you guys to have in your minds. So just that really capacity of our ability to feel compassion. So always pay attention, like somebody shared something really sad with you, or really difficult, and you just couldn't quite understand why they're feeling so sad, or maybe you don't quite understand why they feel like that's such a big deal. It might be a sign that maybe you are just not being able to feel compassion for others. And a negative impact on decision making and implement on teaching strategies. So it's really hard to provide or even think about strategies to help your students if you cannot relate to them, or if you cannot have any compassion throughout the things that they are going through. So now another side of vicarious trauma and compassion fatigue is vicarious resiliency and compassion satisfaction. So that's what we want to have. As teachers, as mental health professionals, we cannot afford, or we cannot prevent from listening to other people's problem, right? Like you have so many students in your class, of course you will listen and hear a lot of things that are said and very difficult, so you cannot prevent that. But there are things that you can do that, so that way instead of having vicarious trauma and compassion fatigue, you can have vicarious resiliency and compassion satisfaction instead. So vicarious resiliency is just a way that transforms a helper's response to the client's own stories of resiliency. So you kind of become strong, or you grow as a person in result of helping others and viewing the others' problems as something that they can overcome, that they can find a solution, and you can kind of relate. So that's something definitely important. Compassion satisfaction is just that feeling of competency and mindfulness. And all of that comes when you take care of yourself, and the pleasure that one gains for helping others. I think that teachers, when they start that, when they decide to become a teacher because they want to help others, like we decided to become a school psychologist because we want to help students, we want to help teachers. So we all have the same goal, but as we kind of get burnout throughout the process, and we start having all this negative consequences and results because of our daily work, then we kind of lose that pleasure of helping others. So if you ever feel like you just cannot help one more person, maybe it's time to take some time off, take care of yourself, so you can be able to feel the pleasure of helping others as well. So that's just a great sign of knowing that you have compassion satisfaction, when you feel happy about helping others.